Hi, my name is Amber and I am 20 years old. I am a photographer, and at one of my weddings, a groom asked me to escape with him. And this ended up being the hardest choice of my life. I always knew what I wanted to do when I grew up. I was going to be a professional photographer, a camera artist. I began shooting when I was a kid, and since then, I rarely parted with my camera. Most of all, I love to shoot people, to bring out their inner beauty with my camera. That's why I was very glad that I had a chance to assist my cousin Greg, who has already worked as a professional wedding photographer. When I was a kid, I rarely saw my cousin Greg, but as he started to gain popularity and got more and more invitations to work in other states, he realized that he'd better get an assistant, and at that time, he remembered his little cousin who expressed a vivid interest in photography. So now I am the official assistant to a wedding photographer. Usually, we'd arrive the day before, run the rehearsal, and shoot all the pre-wedding scenes, both indoors and outdoors. So on the day of the wedding, we basically shoot only the ceremony. Sometimes we have to stay for an extra day if a lot of shooting is needed. But we don't have long jobs like these every week, so I have time for my studies as well as for my personal life. Well, if I had a personal life. In reality, I don't have any personal life. I haven't had a boyfriend since my last year of high school, and soon you will find out why. The story I want to tell you about happened right at one of these long ceremonies in another state where my cousin was invited to shoot. We arrived in advance, and it all went as usual. My cousin was busy shooting, and I was helping him, fully concentrated on my work, until I saw the groom. I see, you think that I've already guessed that I somehow fell in love with the groom, and now that I'm going to tell you about how terrible it was to meet the guy of your dreams on the eve of his wedding day? No, everything was not quite that pathetic, but at the same time, it was pretty sad for me. The groom reminded me of my boyfriend from high school, Marshall. The resemblance was so striking that I thought it must have been a miracle. They looked so much alike. Do you remember that I told you that I did not have a personal life? The reason I stayed single was Marshall. He was my first love, as I was his. We were very happy. We were real high school sweethearts, and no one at our school doubted that we would get married right after graduation. But right before graduation, Marshall suddenly disappeared. It was a very strange situation. He did not tell me anything, no hints. He did not look like a man who was going to leave. We trusted each other so much that I didn't even worry that he didn't call me one day. We didn't have school that day. I remember it very well. This sunny, early spring day when I opened my Facebook profile where Marshall left me a message that said, "I will never forget you." And even then I didn't really worry until I realized that his phone was switched off and that he never went back on his social network profiles. I went to his house to find out what was going on, but the only thing that I found there was that his house was sold. Despite the fact that Marshall was a popular guy at school and was even considered tough, in his heart, he was very soft and romantic and constantly told me how much he loved me and how we would always be together. I also loved him very much, and as I have already said, I rarely parted with my camera, so I shot Marshall everywhere, at baseball games where he played for the school team, at school committee meetings, and every time we went out of town. My whole room was dedicated to Marshall. He looked at me from all my walls, and I did not remove these pictures when he disappeared. I decided that something terrible must have happened. For example, he had done something and was forced to flee. Basically, for the almost 3 years that had passed since graduation, I was waiting for my boyfriend. And then, suddenly, I saw his double at a wedding. Can you imagine my feelings? I had looked at his photos for so long that I could not be mistaken. And even though everybody called him by some other name, I'm pretty sure I heard something like Benedict. I was still convinced that it was Marshall. I could not double-check with Greg. He had never seen Marshall since at the time when we were dating, my cousin was busy building his career. I had to check it out myself. So I snuck onto a terrace where the parents of the bride and groom were drinking tea. And then there was no doubt. I knew Marshall's mother very well, and it was definitely her. A little later, I was able to be 100% sure that I was not mistaken. I went to the car to get my cousin another lens when suddenly a familiar voice called out my name. I froze. Marshall. I was right. It was him, of course, who came up to me and said in an excited whisper that this meeting was an amazing surprise for him and that we urgently needed to talk, but not here. He wanted to meet me in the evening at a cafe. After saying that, he put one of the guest cards for tomorrow's banquet in my hands, and when I looked at it, I saw the address of the cafe where he would be waiting for me this evening. I did not hesitate for even a moment. Of course, I rushed to the cafe as soon as Greg and I had finished the preparation for the next day and made sure that everything was in order. When I entered the cafe, my heart melted. Marshall was already there, and he had even ordered the coffee that I used to drink when we were in high school. Decaf latte with soy milk, no sugar. He remembered it even though almost 3 years had passed. And then he took my hand and told me a story that could be turned into a movie. I knew that his father worked as an accountant in a large company, but of course, none of us knew that this company was involved in some kind of shady activities. And Marshall's father was a witness to a dirty case. He was asked to make a statement in front of the court, but asked for the witness protection program for himself and his family. Everything was kept in the strictest confidence, and even Marshall himself did not know anything until the last minute. One morning, he was simply confronted with the fact that they were leaving for another state, that he was being transferred to another school, and that the only choice he had at this point was what his new name would be. That was how Marshall became Benedict. Despite all his requests, he was not allowed to inform his beloved girlfriend, that was me, about his departure. The only thing he had managed to secretly do was leave me a message on Facebook, and even for that he was punished and was forced to close his profiles on his social networks. He really loved me, he said. For 2 years, he was trying to find a way to tell me everything without jeopardizing his family and me as well. And then life took its toll, and he met Cindy. And now Cindy is pregnant, and her super old-fashioned and influential parents pressured his family, and now he has to marry her in order to avoid any unnecessary attention that this scandal could draw to his family. The night before the wedding, I could not sleep at all. I looked at the photos from the rehearsal and remembered how happy Marshall and I were a few years ago. I cried and tried to imagine myself in Marshall's place and what I would do if he told me everything. I probably would have left my school and family to be with him. In the morning, my cousin and I went to the church. We had to work anyway. The groom was already there, and the bride was late. I saw that Marshall looked worried, and for a moment I hoped that maybe Cindy had changed her mind. These things happen. Maybe only in the movies, but my story with Marshall was already a lot like something out of a movie. Marshall noticed me too, and suddenly he took out his smartphone, and within a second, I got a message from him. Let's run away from here. Yes. It was our chance to turn our movie-like story into reality. I did not know what to do. On one hand, you see, I wanted to be with Marshall, but on the other, I did not think that Cindy deserved this kind of humiliation. Oh, can you just imagine? The groom runs away from your wedding? And then she would have to live with this memory for the rest of her life. I was so carried away by my daydreams and thoughts that I didn't notice that Cindy had arrived. She was wearing a beautiful dress, and although that day I already knew that she was pregnant, nobody could detect the slightest sign of her condition. Her face was glowing with happiness, and at this moment I realized that even though I did not know this girl, I did not have any right to ruin her life. I did not want to be tempted, so I turned off my phone and left the ceremony briefly, coming up with some ridiculous excuse for my cousin Greg. Of course, he was furious that I left him to work alone, and I almost lost my job. But if he only knew who the groom was and what he suggested that we do. I never saw Marshall Benedict again. Of course, he did not run away from his own wedding and ended up getting married that day, but he still tried to contact me, so I blocked his phone number. I did not have to block him on any social networks because he did not open any new accounts. Although his wife Cindy regularly posts pictures, including those that my cousin and I shot during the rehearsal, I look at them every now and then, and it hurts a lot when I think I could have been in those pictures in her place, and I probably should have been there. I kept someone else's family together at the cost of my own happiness, and I am still not sure if I did the right thing. One thing I know for certain, it was a good deed, but will it make me happy? Write in the comments what you think about my story. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Hi,